Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is really an extraordinary kind of project. Highly unusual to have a team of reporters. It's almost biography by committee, and you're the committee chairman.
That's one way to look at it.
How did this project come about?
Well, this project came out, I think that after Senator Kennedy announced his illness, announced his brain cancer, people began to look at him with slightly different eyes. He's a very polarizing figure. He's somebody about whom people tended to have very fixed views. There were a lot of people who loved Ted Kennedy from the 60s. There were a lot of people who in the 70s and 80s decided that he was either too liberal for them or a morally compromised figure, and just had a sort of caricature in their mind of Ted Kennedy. When they realized that he was suffering from brain cancer, and in all the sort of news coverage that went around that, I think people were willing to look at Ted Kennedy differently. Now, sort of at the same time that we at the Globe were cogitating over that information, people at Simon & Schuster, who ended up being our publisher, also were interested in this and were looking for a biography. And it turned out there was no better resource for information. There was no better group of reporters. There were no people who knew Ted Kennedy and could follow the entire arc of his career better than the Globe. So we felt like it was both part of our newspaper's journalistic mission to try to make sense of this man's half-century in power as the dominant figure in New England and in Massachusetts, but also to provide a definitive biography about somebody about whom there hasn't been a definitive biography. So,
Peter, were you and your fellow writers here, were you solicited to write the book? Were you assigned to write the book as part of your duties as employees of the Globe?
No. Well, there was an approach made. There was also a lot of internal discussion about how we wanted to approach the Kennedy story. Ultimately, we ended up doing a very conventional kind of book proposal after we had already, settled on how we were going to do the series for the newspaper, and so it developed really naturally, like any normal book project would.
So, to be clear, this is a Globe book.
This is a Globe book, absolutely, and it draws on the work of the people next to me, and also on some of the memories of some of our retirees who covered the earliest of Kennedy's races.
And you took on the role of editor.
Yeah, I was the story editor and sort of plotted out how we would approach the story and what would be considered part of each chapter and sort of what the story arc would be, and then worked with Marty Barron, the editor of the Globe, to assign reporters to each section, and we obviously know the staff very well between us, and we're able to I think find the right people to cover each period in Kennedy's career.
So you had story meetings?
Yes, we had
editorial meetings.
Many story meetings. Some of them had a brainstorming quality where people would talk about their own memories of Senator Kennedy. People would debate back and forth whether certain episodes in his life, certain aspects of his personal background, and this is a man for whom his family background and legacy was a very defining experience. But how those parts of his background impacted later decisions and things. So there was a lot of discussion along the way.
Now you have these various reporters. Everybody has a different voice. How do you deal with all those different voices and writing styles? Each one's idiosyncratic writing style when you get to the book.
Well, first of all, I think the writers were all very cognizant of the fact that they were writing a book that would have a sort of larger narrative to it. So I don't think that anybody decided to go off half-cocked in a stylistic direction, and that was much appreciated, certainly by me. But then, both through the talking out of the different sections with people and then editing it afterwards, we were able to add enough sort of connective tissue and make sure that things that had been referenced in earlier chapters were then referred to in later chapters. And in some cases, people's sections and contributions were then divided so that it became more of a chronological narrative. So some material, for example, about his family that in the Globe series had been in the last part was put in the part of the 1970s when it was actually happening. So there was a little bit more structural editing as well.
So, and you inserted, I take it that there's certainly a narrative flow to this, but but that you as editor are inserting on other people's suggestions, inserting material here and there as you go along through the chapters.
We believe that this book reads like it had one author, that it's a full narrative, and certainly we've been very pleased that people have responded to it that way. But I also say that, this was put together in a matter of 6 or 7 months, but having, 7 primary writers, but also drawing on the experiences of other people at the Globe and as I mentioned before, some of the retirees, it's the equivalent really of having 10 to 15 top-notch writers, working for 6 months, which is like having a major biographer spending 8 or 10 years with the subject. So we really do consider this a definitive book.
And you couldn't help but notice that in the middle of the Globe series, I think it was February 22nd, the senator emerged, if only to talk to the New York Times to make the point, which was a cogent one, that he's still alive.
Well, I don't know if that was a response to our series or some gossip items that were saying he was not going to return to the Senate. And we were very pleased to see that he did return to the Senate today. He participated in President Obama's healthcare forum and looked great. And
well, he sounded terrific.
Yes.
We don't watch television where I work. We listen to it.
So
he sounded terrific. You didn't interview Senator Kennedy during the course of the project. Why not?
Well, Senator Kennedy, as most people know, has signed a number a while ago, at least a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, to do his own memoirs, which he's presumably working on the longer path, but I think he has a contractual obligation not to talk to any reporters about his life. So, TV, biographers, whatever, he's not done any interviews of that
Did
type.
you do any negotiating?
But I was going to say, David, that given that restriction, that he's not talking about his life for this contractual reason, our reporters have had frequent, nearly constant contact with him over the years. So the book does include new information directly from him, including Susan Milligan, who's covered him for our Washington bureau, and some really interesting, surprising things that he has told her in past interviews.
Did the senator make it possible for you to talk to some people? Did he give people the okay to talk to you? Did he give you cooperation other than himself talking to you?
This book contains fresh interviews with his closest friends from childhood, his closest friends from Harvard, his closest friends from law school, his cousins, the Gargans, or Mary Jo Gargan, who sort of grew up with him and lived with him for a period as a child. That included interviews with his nieces and nephews. So most of the people who we wanted to get, we ended up getting, which was really, really gratifying.
Now, interestingly enough, the senator, you should know, the senator whose own book, his autobiography, which is titled True Compass, was scheduled to come out in November of 2010, has now been moved up to October 27th of 2009. Do you think that was because of the Globe?
I don't think so. I think it's because of his illness.
He's moved it up to 2009, but it's unfortunate because, of course, Adam Clymer had about 21 interviews with him in the course of Clymer's biography. It might have helped, but they make it the point. The publishing company made the point of saying the Globe's account was not the authorized account. I guess that means involving.
Well, the authorized account is obviously his own account, and I think that people will look forward to his memoirs. He's a fascinating figure who's been a dominant figure in politics for the last 50 years and has been part of all the great history. But obviously somebody's memoirs, particularly somebody like Ted Kennedy, who not only is not known to be very reflective, but whose own actions have been so much a part of these decisions. There's a tremendous interest in hearing his perspective, but on the other hand, his perspective is only a part of the story. So I think that it was a liberating factor for us that this was not in any way intended to be his own story.
Yeah. Of course, it's no surprise at all. It's to be expected that given the senator's medical condition, that all the media outlets in town have prepared obituaries in the event. I mean, that's what we do as a profession. In fact, his obituary has probably been rewritten a number of times over the decades. That's what we do as news outlets, to be prepared.